Did you know that one single podcast episode could lead to a 6-figure per year deal? Let me tell you how it happened to me. And it might not be a traditional method that you've used before to grow your business. You see, I have my own podcast where I've launched nearly 150 episodes over the last 3 years. Now, most people think you make a bunch of money like Joe Rogan or Ed Milet by just having a podcast. And obviously, that's not true. But here's exactly what I did. I strategically invited a guest onto my podcast to share his experience. Now, I was just thinking that I was going to be providing value to him and my audience, which I was. What I didn't realize is that he was about to become my next big client for my digital marketing agency. And so in today's video, I'm going to break down exactly how this went from a simple podcast interview to a signed $100,000 plus per year deal in less than a week. So whether you have a digital marketing agency or a business where relationships are king, you're going to want to watch this entire video. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. My name is Adam McChesney, and I help digital marketers start and scale their agencies. Now let's go make some money. All right, so now it's time to dive into the exact process that I went from having someone on my podcast to generating them as a client for a digital marketing agency and having them sign a contract for over $100,000 in a year from literally having this person on my podcast. And so a little bit about what we're going to go over here today is we're going to talk about the importance of having a podcast. So I'm not going to go through like 101, here's how to start a podcast and here's why you should do it. But I am going to talk about the importance of having a podcast in general, especially as a digital marketing or B2B agency or business of any kinds and the importance around that. I'm going to talk about how to find the right guests, how to build the relationship, how to quote unquote pitch your stuff, and ultimately how to close the deal. So the importance of having a podcast, I believe, and a lot of people would agree with this, is that it is the ultimate networking tool. I can literally go in and ask a bunch of people that I want to do business with, current clients, past clients, future potential clients, and say, hey, do you want to come on my podcast and promote yourself, promote what you do and your business? It's so easy, right? It's great for content creation. So especially if you're doing video, which I typically obviously recommend, you have a YouTube video that goes out, you then can put that into an AI tool and it cuts up a bunch of little mini clips that you can use for short content creation, which is awesome. It's another line in the water, right? So if I have another piece of content creation out there, if I have another opportunity to go get my name, my business, my brand out there in front of the right people, then the more people that get the eyeballs on it, the more likely our business is to grow in the process. Not to mention our guests are going to be sharing the content as well. And you are then going to get tapped in and basically share and swap audiences, right? So it's a massive benefit from that regard. It also helps you get better at selling and communicating, right? So the more I'm asking questions, the more I'm hearing from individuals that again would be ideal clients or current clients, I'm able to say, oh, wow, I learned this about asking this question, and you get better at listening. You're only supposed to talk 10 to 20% of the time as a podcast host. So it's really challenged me to listen more than it is for me to just get up there and say, blah, 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 and then talk about myself, right? So you get better at selling and communicating. And really it's free lead gen. And I use free quote unquote, because of course, like I pay to go into a studio, I pay to have it edited and all of those different things, but you can get started doing this very simple and easy with just a computer, Zoom, etc. But I use free because I'm not having to then go and pay ad spend, behind any of this stuff or anything like that. I'm not paying to have these guests come on. So it is quote unquote free in that aspect. So how do you find the right guests? I know a lot of people that have podcasts where it's just like the same thing over and over and over again. And they're just doing it to basically have guests on, but they're the wrong guests. And I've been there myself as well. But I always like starting with current clients. Your current clients, especially is like having a podcast where you're known as like the subject matter expert on this. Have your current clients on. Have ideal future clients on. So you're like, wow, I would love to have this person as a client. I'm going to go ahead and ask them to be on my podcast. Referral partners, people that are sending you business and people that you can send business to. That's a great place to start. Big names or influencers. And the reason why I like this is because they can share, obviously, the episode. And from there, you're going to get additional eyeballs and exposure. But when I have a big guest on, people that have been maybe on the fence or they don't listen to every single episode that we launch, they're like, wow, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to listen to this episode because so-and-so is on there. So how do you build the relationship, right? So how am I building the relationship with the guests? Well, before the interview even starts, whether that's call, Zoom, messages back and forth, super important to be able to do that. Day of the interview. So like this recent podcast guest that literally went from like, I didn't even know this guy. Somebody had said, hey, that I had previously on my podcast, that's also a referral partner, said, you need to interview him. I said, okay, sounds good. We were texting back and forth. And then all of a sudden he came into the podcast. We started to uncover that he was getting ready to sign up with a marketing agency that just didn't have his best interests in mind, was also going to charge him an arm and a leg and basically have him do a lot of the stuff he didn't need to do. So we wouldn't have uncovered that, right, unless I asked some series of questions and really got to know him before the interview, which is the day of the interview. Now, during the interview, right, I'm asking the right questions, understanding kind of where they're at, what they're looking for, etc. Right after the interview. So again, kind of that small chit chat back and forth, interview's over and I'm still kind of asking questions. That was the part where he said, hey, here's the proposal that I actually got from this other marketing company. Would you mind taking a look at it? I took a look at it and I said, wow, like we need to set up a call next week, which we did. And that's where the process kind of started with the proposal. And then it ended up closing shortly after that. But generalistic, right? You need to make sure that you kind of set a next step 4 days after the interview. And right after the interview as well, as I send a little video and I'm like, hey, Adam, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. I really appreciate the opportunity to have you as a guest. Excited for the episode to come out, talk about next steps of my team reaching out for a headshot and a bio, etc. And then again, if there is opportunity to close or to have a deal come from that, then I'm talking about next steps there. But in all reality, I'm playing the long game with this, right? Sure, I did go recently from podcast interview and not really knowing this person to $100,000 deal. But in reality, most of this stuff is going to happen with the long game, right? So how do you pitch your stuff, right? Podcasts, again, allow you to be the subject matter expert. So you need to go into this thinking like, okay, hey, they need what I have. I'm not going to try to like, quote unquote, come out there and say that, but if they're coming on my podcast where I'm talking about X, Y, and Z, I am the subject matter expert. I'm always connecting with the guests prior on social media and continuing to doing that after, right? I can then ask them the right questions, kind of tee it up for myself on the podcast and say, what are you doing here? What are your pain points here? Where have you struggled? Setting up a post-interview meeting, which is kind of what we just talked about, where it's that like next step, but ultimately offering something free or an audit of their online presence, an example of a digital marketing agency. So then that way I can tee up what I want to obviously propose. And then from there, as far as closing the actual deal, obviously follow up is king. So many times, people start to realize like, hey, I should have followed up with this person. I could have closed that deal. I could have done X, Y, and Z, and then they don't do it. So setting reminders and tasks inside of Go High Level, right, is something I always do after having somebody on my podcast. I start then referring them business when I can. And then, of course, when the episode goes live, I promote the heck out of that episode. And if I need their stuff, right, I do obviously buy it as well if it's necessary. I don't just buy stuff to buy stuff usually. But if I need what they have, I'm likely going to buy it and or again, just start promoting what they're doing. but my goal is to stay consistent with being top on their mind, that I'm the subject matter expert in personal branding, digital marketing, etc. That right there is literally how I went and strategically set up all of our guests on our podcast. And I went literally from podcast interview of not even knowing this person. So this person came on to my show from a referral of a previous guest and a referral partner of mine. And I went from interviewing him, knowing that I was a subject matter expert, asking the right questions, allowing him to share his authority and expertise, to closing a six-figure, $100,000 a year plus deal as it relates to our digital marketing agency services. That right there is exactly how I teed it up and how I do it for every single podcast guest. All right, there you have it. I just shared my exact blueprint and strategy on how I went from a podcast interview, having someone on my podcast, providing value, promoting his business, and getting the word out about what he was doing, to then uncovering a need before the podcast episode even started, where he was getting ready to sign up with a digital marketing agency that was not going to provide them the services that they were actually needing, not to mention the cost associated with the proposed services. And so often people get the wrong impression about what you can actually do by having a podcast. You think of all the big names that are out there that are making this money from sponsorships and all those promotional deals. And while that is something that is a possibility, it's not where most of us will actually be able to make money from a podcast. So I strategically invite guests onto my podcast so then that way I can build relationships with them, show them a little bit more about what we do and have a deeper conversation. Otherwise, I would have to cold call them, potentially try to set up a traditional coffee or lunch meeting. This is a much better way because they're able to promote what they do, get acclimated with myself, my podcast, my business, and my audience, and grow from there. So if you haven't done so already, we have a free Facebook group. You'll see a link in the description of this video where we teach all things digital marketing, personal branding, and much more. And if you haven't done so already, make sure to check out our free and extended 30-day trial of GHL. Thank you so much for watching this video. Stay tuned for more incredible videos and information exactly like this one. Now let's go make some money.